Hello, everyone, and welcome to Police Off the Cuff, Real Crime Stories. I'm your host, retired NYPD Sergeant Bill Cannon, a 27-year veteran of the NYPD. You know, folks, in this case that you see up on the screen, the thumbnail, Luigi Mangione, political revolutionary, corporate terrorist. These are some of the words we're hearing being used in connection with this alleged shooter of the United Healthcare CEO, Brian Thompson. Corporate terrorist? Certainly doesn't look like it in that picture or in this picture. And when we look into his background, totally unexpected for someone that would execute someone on 54th Street and 6th Avenue in Manhattan, Avenue of the Americas for you tourists. Doesn't seem like it fits with an executioner, you know, an Ivy League education, the valedictorian of his high school in Baltimore, from a family, not just affluent, they got megabucks, this family, all right? So how does that type of background create this? How did it create this person? And what we hear now also is the online community is rooting for him. They're rooting that he gets off. So a big segment of this population is just dismissing that he executed a human being, a father of two, a husband, a brother, a sister, a family member, and the CEO of United Health. Because the cause seems to be bigger than the human element. So, folks, hold on to your seats. Hold on to your hats. Hold on to your loved ones. Hold on to your drink, because you're about to enter true crime from a police perspective. You're about to enter the off-the-cuff zone, the police off-the-cuff zone.
There has to be some common sense.
They were the ones who called 911 to get him help, and now they're calling for change.
And now, a word from our sponsor. BetOnline continues to be the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for online betting. From the earliest odds to in-game live betting, BetOnline provides you with all the action and the ability to watch the games as they happen. With the largest selection of odds on everything from football, the NBA and college basketball, NHL to UFC. Head to BetOnline today and don't forget to use promo code BLEAV, BELIEVE, for your welcome bonus on your first deposit. BetOnline, the game starts here. You know, so much has been happening with this case, and it's entered a new phase, right? So now he's been arrested. He was arraigned on charges in Pennsylvania, and now they have filed for extradition to New York. They are charging him with murder, second degree, in New York. He did not waive extradition, so this could take weeks to get him extradited to New York City, to New York State. Anyway, joining me tonight is retired NYPD Sergeant and straight out of Brooklyn, Phil Grimaldi. Welcome to the show, Phil.
You promoted me, Bill, detective, not sergeant. How you doing?
Oh, okay. Also coming on the show tonight is retired NYPD Sergeant, professor at Albertus Magnus College in Connecticut, all-around good guy, attorney. Welcome to the show, Professor Mike.
Bill, good evening. Good evening, Phil.
How are you, Mike?
Hey.
And this is one of my favorite guests of all time that we have on the show tonight. And I always love having her on the show. She has a wealth of information. She's so smart. She's so cool. She's so calm. She's so collected. And when you hear the background she has, you're like, wow, how did she do that and stay so calm? Anyway, welcome to the show, forensic psychologist, Dr. Joni Johnston. Welcome, Dr. Johnston.
Thank you. What an introduction.
Welcome.
You know, Dr. Joni, this has totally entered a new phase. You know, they just recently, in the last couple of hours, published his manifesto online. Now, I'm not going to read it because I can't verify if it's, I don't think the police have said yet that, yes, that's it. That's verifiable. That is the real deal. But some of the things we want, I mean, look at this kid. He's a man. He's 26 years old, private high school. He was the valedictorian. UPenn, bachelor's degree and a master's degree. This kid is a really smart kid. What turned him politically? And, you know, the people are calling him a political revolutionary. People are calling him a corporate terrorist. What turned him to that, Dr. Joni?
That is such an interesting question. And I think that we're going to see more and more evidence that supports the answer to that, you know, as we get more information about him. Because you're absolutely right, Bill. There's absolutely, when you look at his background, you think, this guy had everything. He was a nice looking guy. He was incredibly smart. He had a loving family. He had an affluent family. He was educated. You know, he was almost a prodigy in some ways, valedictorian, et cetera, et cetera. And then look where, if this is the person who is convicted and he did do this, you know, how did this person end up that way? And I think we have to look at, in particular, where this person was in the past 6 months going forward, because the few things that have come out, and again, a lot of things need to be verified at this point, really do show somebody who changed in the past 6 months. Now, I want to be very clear, you know, I'm on the show with detectives, that explanations, understanding does not equal excuses. There's no excuse for shooting somebody in the back. But I do think it's important to try to understand how this person ended up the way that he did, if in fact, again, he did do this.
You know, Dr. Joni, you know, one of the things they're saying online, and I'm not buying it at all, is that, oh, he had this back problem. And ever since he had this back pain, something happened to him, which to me implies that maybe he was taking some drugs to relieve the pain. And maybe that changed his temperament. Maybe that changed his personality. Professor Mike.
Yeah, Billy, you know, it could possibly be because he's taking maybe some very strong psychotrope painkillers, and that may have some sort of effect on his mental acuity, but maybe the wearing of the down from the pain. But still, that's one thing. But to actually go on and maybe you would feel depressed as a young man with an injury, serious injury, maybe if you're athletic, you know, you feel very, very much depressed by that. However, that's a huge leap to go from feeling depressed to, you know, angry at the healthcare industry, which his family, in a way, was part of. So I don't think that, you know, I don't think it's so much so that he's going to lead or be the spokesperson, or he's going to be the figurehead to revolutionize healthcare. I don't think there's a revolution going on. I don't think that he feels like he's really even a part of anything. I think he really does feel maybe alone and disconnected. What he once had, maybe before some injuries that he had, was a great life. And maybe he's very depressed about that. He's striking out in anger. But I don't see him as being a part of a person who actually wants to be around a group of people. I think he's more of a loner at this point in his life. And I think, you know, Dr. Joni's right. Something happened where there was a huge change in his trajectory. He was very successful. He had everything going for him. He had a very good, fabulous grade A education. He was brilliant. And now look where he is. Look how much in terms of his trajectory, it's degenerated. It's generated into like a little bit of madness, if you ask me. So that's where I think he's at.
You know, I don't think that this is so unusual that people from backgrounds of great wealth and great privilege become radical. And Ted Kaczynski, who he quoted him. In fact, he was in a book club and they read one of his books. So he sort of somewhat idolized Ted Kaczynski. Phil, your thoughts?
Yeah, my thoughts are this. The general feeling, I think, is there was some type of anger towards health insurance companies in the United States. Obviously, that seems to be what the driving force is in this case. But I think, Bill, you pointed out a little bit. I'm going to piggyback it. The injury to his back perhaps led to some of maybe the painkillers or narcotic use or something like that. But I don't think that he was denied health care. He comes from a very wealthy family, as we know, and they probably did have some type of insurance. Maybe there was some stumbling blocks. I don't know. But I don't think that you go from having an issue with an insurance company to gunning someone down, shooting them in the back over it. I think, and Dr. Joni, I put on my my psychiatrist or hat today, and I looked up some things, and he definitely falls into the category of psychopath and sociopath. Based on what we saw in the last 2 days, that really jumped out at me. Yesterday, he looked like a meek individual that was eating a hash brown in McDonald's when he was arrested. And then today, when he was being brought into court, he lashed out and wanted to get his word out to the media. So, and I think we saw two different people there. There was also a book about using hallucinogenic mushrooms to change your brain. So perhaps he dabbled in that. But where was his family? He has a family. He's been off the, he's off the radar for the last several months. And was his family looking for him? How did he fund whatever he was doing, going around the country, Hawaii, Maryland, Pennsylvania, New York City? Did he have, access to funds? And I was very shocked and surprised. He was arrested yesterday. Where was his family in court today and last night? I know if, God forbid, one of my children were arrested, what's the first thing I'm doing? I'm going to the police station or to court. I mean, it's just shocking to me that, the family, I guess they're going to take a lot of heat, no question. But where were they in court today? And perhaps that has something to do with his profile, his background. Maybe he didn't have a close relationship with his family. Maybe that's playing into some of what we have here. And obviously, like everyone sees, this kid had promise. It was actually disturbing to me to see his background. Valedictorian in high school, a master's degree, a very bright kid, a handsome boy, and he just threw it all away to go kill someone in cold blood. Just does not make sense.
Dr. Joni, I'm sorry. I know you were probably going to respond to what Phil just said, but I just want to move this along. He did so many things that showed that he really planned this crime out. Covering his face, he reconned it. He was there for 10 days. He knew exactly somehow. And this is why we thought someone else was involved or giving him information. He was there when Brian Thompson walked out of the other hotel and crossed the street, and he shot him in the back. So he had this information. Question, $1 million question. Did he want to get caught, Dr. Joni?
I don't know that he wanted to get caught. I mean, he seemed to be completely stunned from what has come out. So a lot of what I'm going to be responding to is what's come out of the media, and how accurate that is, we have yet to kind of determine. So from what I understand, and I want to respond to what you said, Detective Phil, one is, from my understanding, his mother actually reported him missing on November the 18th. So he had been kind of missing in action from his family for at least, a few weeks at least. And, I'm again responding to things his friends have come out and talked about, people who knew him, who were close to him, all of whom have said, this is somebody who had a history of back problems his entire life, had some kind of condition, got injured more seriously in 2022, had this back surgery, last summer, and then kind of went off the radar for about 6 months. Friends were reaching out saying, hey, where are you? Let's get together, whatever. Nobody, radio silence. Nobody knew where this guy was. Now, I don't know what that means, because there's absolutely clear evidence that this guy premeditated this. And this is where I think it's important to talk about this whole issue of mental illness or some depression or those kinds of things versus insanity, which are very, very different. When you have this kind of level of premeditation, this kind of planning, it's pretty difficult to start talking about an insanity plea, right? Because you have all this evidence of somebody who did all this planning and, the mask and the gun and, showing up at a certain place and leaving and, all kinds of stuff. So I think that when you look at this person's history, and again, it's so hard to verify this manifesto that's come out. Did he write this manifesto? Was he really enamored with the Unabomber? If that's the case, and he is enamored with this person, with this Unabomber, and he somehow, then again, I have been asked about diagnosis. I would never do that with somebody that I've never evaluated. But when I look at people that I do talk to violent offenders almost every day in terms of my job, and I look at people who committed, I don't want to say similar crimes because this is a unique situation in many respects, but people who have no criminal history, have been successful, and all of a sudden commit a violent crime. One of the things I often see is somebody who has some life event, they get depressed, they initially think about suicide, and then they decide, no, I'm going to take somebody out with me. I need to make this a bigger purpose. I need I need to kind of leave some kind of a legacy with me. They don't necessarily kill themselves, but they decide to turn this into some kind of a mission. And from what's coming out, it sounds like that in his mind, he developed this belief that he was somehow, and I think honestly, like I tell some of the people that I see and some of the inmates is, I understand psychological pain. I understand depression. I understand physical pain. There's never a reason to hurt somebody else because of those things. And I think that's really important to kind of keep in mind. But if some of these things are true, then it sounds like this is somebody who became extremely depressed, over a lot of things. There's a lot of things that have been said about his mom. Are they true? Have you guys heard about those kind of things and talking about his mom having some kind of medical condition? I don't know if this is true or not, but for whatever reason in his mind, he blames the healthcare industry for his psychological and physical pain and convinced himself that it was his mission to somehow not just vindicate himself, which I think he would see as a selfless thing. This is the valedictorian, right? This is somebody who's been a leader. He decides to turn this into some kind of personal crusade that he can then justify as necessary, when I think it really is primarily about his own pain. But it becomes some kind of personal crusade in his mind.
Dr. Joni, that's a big mouthful to digest.
No,
I mean, it's very interesting, but it's a lot.
It makes a lot of sense too.
Yeah.
A lot of
But
sense.
one of the things I find curious, and you would be able to answer this, is that he struck back at the very same institution that his family is. His family owns nursing homes.
Yeah.
And they own a company called Lorien Health, as well as a radio station, and as well as a Valley Country Club, Hayfield. So they are capitalists. They are the same people who he killed this guy. They're just like him. So was he in turn, like, I'm going way outside my lane of expertise. Is he killing himself by doing that, or killing someone in his family? Because they're wealthy entrepreneurs.
I don't know his relationship with his family, so I can't really comment on whether he's somehow, like you said, taking his pain and or his relationship with his family and their wealth and their, financial holdings and somehow killing that. But I do think that he is somebody who has been special his whole life. I mean, he's a very bright person. He's an attractive person. He was a valedictorian. He has a master's degree, has a bachelor's degree. And if you look at it to that extent, I think it's understandable that if he is going to do something like this, or if he is going to be desperate and act out in some way, he's going to need to be special, and he is going to need to tell himself a story, or he's not just acting out his own issues or pain or whatever, but he's somehow helping others. He's somehow doing something for the greater good. And I do think he believes that. I don't think it's true, but I think he believes that.
Absolutely.
Billy, could I add something to that?
Phil, I just want to throw one thing in there.
Go ahead.
When he was caught, he had $10,000 in cash in U.S. currency and another $2,000 in foreign currency. So what were his plans? He clearly planned to get away. The foreign currency, maybe he planned on fleeing the country, but he had money. He had cash. So he would, that tells you something about his motives and what his next move was. Sorry, Phil, to interrupt you.
No, go ahead. The thing I was going to say was another element of this is his family owned nursing homes. So they had to be dealing with insurance companies and perhaps hearing complaints from the family that was dealing with the insurance companies and knowing how, let's say, healthcare is going to be cut off, or we're not going to pay this claim and stuff like that. So maybe over the years, those elements were, going into his head and hearing about those things. And that's where it may have started the anger towards the healthcare industry, the insurance industry. And I guess maybe exactly what Dr. Joni is saying, having this back issue 2 years ago seems to be the trigger point that where he went off the rails. I mean, after the surgery, that's when he goes dark and everything. And Bill, that's a great point. He's got $10,000 in cash. Where did that come from? And it seems like, I mean, he wasn't with anyone, when he was in the McDonald's, he was by himself, and Hostel, he was by himself. So he may have just acted alone. We were very curious to see who he was talking to on the phone. I mean, he could have been faking that when he was a few minutes before the shooting. He's seen on it looked like he was on his cell phone. And the other thing is, Bill, you and I talked about this before we went on the air. Was this a one and done? I feel like there could have been other targets going forward if he hadn't been arrested.
Absolutely. I believe that too. Prying Paula from the chat. Have you seriously not read his manifesto, Bill? No, I have, but I can't verify that it's true yet. So I'm not going to read it. I'm not going to put it out there as true until the NYPD says that manifesto posted online is exactly the manifesto that we have. So, because it's not verified. No one has stamped it. This is correct. This is the manifesto. I want to play a short clip. And to me, when I watched this told me a lot about him.
And completely out of touch. And it's an insult to the intelligence of the American people. It's a lived experience.
Wow. So he clearly wanted to make some type of statement there, screaming out some political ideology. Professor Mike, your thoughts?
Yeah, Bill, just thinking about what Dr. Joni said and what Phil said, here's a kid who was, up until the back injury, he was in great physical condition. We were all, young ones, and we all felt invincible. And here he's a kid of privilege, and he's a kid whose family has made significant money from the healthcare industry. Maybe he heard many times about how the healthcare insurance companies don't want to compensate for certain claims. And maybe there's been complaints in his family at the dinner table about his father or mother talking about that sort of thing. And maybe it goes in one ear and out the other because he's not affected by it. Now he's affected by it. He's 25, he's 23 at the time, maybe he's injured, and this may be a significant change in his life. And maybe he is disgusted by how he now is now personal, how he now is on the receiving end of treatment from a health insurance company, and how he feels that, wait a second, how could this happen to me? And then he at some point, in his mind, he decides that he's going to do something about it and, try to be some sort of maybe a terrorist to the health insurance. We don't believe that he has any real followers. He's not leading a revolution. There's not a group that's going to strike against other CEOs. But I think Phil's right. If he got away with this, say he did get away with this, and he was on the lam for 6 months, say he got to some place, it doesn't mean that he wouldn't strike out at one other CEO in a different company. So I think Phil's right. If he had gotten away with this, although he's not a serial killer in the way we think about serial killers in the police department, he had the potential truly for being a serial killer.
Absolutely. From the chat, Angie, I don't understand second-degree murder. He shot a man dead in the back on camera. Angie, to be a first-degree murder, A, you have to be over 18. B, there has to be an underlying felony besides the murder. So robbery, kidnapping, sexual assault, that would make it a first degree. But because none of those exist here, it's a murder second degree. As heinous it is to shoot someone in the back, it still doesn't make it rise to a first degree. I hope I explained it. Did I explain that well, Mike? You got the law degree.
Yeah. No, you did.
I'm just a copper.
Sounded good to me too.
No, you did. You did. I'm convinced.
And that's state specific, right? I'm just wondering, that's in New York. That's state specific. That's what I thought. Yeah.
If this case goes into the federal system, charges could change too. But right now, they want him brought back to New York. They issued the warrant for murder second degree. As Bill pointed out, there's no underlying that we know of, and but charges can be added later on down the line for sure.
Dr. Joni, when watching that tape where he sort of goes off the rails as he's being brought, A, what we're talking about earlier. He wants attention, right? He wants to shout out his ideology there. And it also shows a little bit off. He's going off the rails a little bit there. Watching that, did that concern you? And tell me what it said to you.
Well, it certainly demonstrated, I think, that there was another opportunity for him to, I guess, communicate his message, which it sounded like he was trying to do, that this is an insult to the American people. I'm not, I didn't catch the entire message that he was given. In terms of him going off the rails, I think that I've had so many questions about mental illness and those kinds of things. It seemed to me, because when he went into the hearing, my understanding is he was pretty quiet. He started to respond at one point, and his attorney told him not to say anything, and he did not. So when you see somebody who acts one way in a situation and can go in and control himself in another situation, it doesn't mean he's thinking clearly, but it doesn't support this is somebody who's psychotic, who is so off the wall that he cannot control himself. He's going to go in there and start yelling at the judge or start talking about the healthcare industry and screaming to everybody who would listen to him. So there's a certain degree, I think, of control, at least from what we're hearing, that he is able to modify his behavior in situations. But does that mean that he's thinking clearly? No. I mean, I think, if the manifesto that's out there is accurate, which we don't know, there's clearly some very distorted thinking involved in that. But distorted thinking is very different from somebody who is psychotic, who is severely mentally ill. I mean, you can have people, for example, and I know Professor Mike, you could jump in here and talk about this, and I hope that you do, have somebody who's a member of a cult, for example, who has very unclear thinking. We would all kind of go, this doesn't make any sense, but it's a shared belief by people. It doesn't rise to the level of somebody who's psychotic, and that person's likely going to be held accountable in a court of law because it's different.
Right. If a person may have the craziest thoughts to us, what we think would be crazy, we might use the term brainwashed. They are part of a cult and they're following a leader and they're not really expressing any ability to self-control. However, getting up every day, putting your shoes on, having breakfast, brushing your teeth, getting out to a job, having normal relations, that shows that whatever the strange things you're doing, it doesn't rise to the level of insanity. You're not totally addled by whatever mental health issues you're worrying about. This guy clearly isn't addled at all by any of the issues that he's dealing with. So Dr. Joni, you're absolutely right. I'm 100% with you on that one.
I want to play this from News Nation.
Everybody is trying to figure out when this shift happened. We have learned that he was reported missing. This is a new piece of information. He was reported missing by his mother on November 18th, and she reportedly made the call to San Francisco police that he had gone missing. He had family connections to San Francisco. He was living in Hawaii.
I find that very difficult to believe, and I'll tell you why. You cannot just call a police department from another state and say, I want to report my son missing. He's 26 years old. They're going to say he's an adult. He can come and go as he pleases. What makes him missing?
What's the extenuating circumstance?
Right. Is there foul play? Did he indicate he was going to commit suicide? Was there any other, nefarious thing? Then we're not taking a missing report. So I don't buy this. They tried. Yeah, you could try to report someone missing. That doesn't mean a police department will say, oh, yes, let me fill out this paperwork. If police departments took reports under those circumstances, they would do nothing else but missing persons reports.
100%.
Yeah, Billy, he's not a special category person at the time that it doesn't sound like they indicated that he would be a special category person. He's not a little child. He's not an elderly adult, possibly with Alzheimer's. He's, as far as the family's concerned, he's not somebody who's suffering from mental illness and who needs their psychotropic medication daily or else they'll go off the rails. He's not, in any sort of danger. There's never been a threat to him. Maybe I'm thinking, as I'm hearing this report, is that maybe she called the San Francisco Police Department with his last known address and said, could you do like a welfare check for me? So but the verbiage turns into a missing persons report. I don't think they will. I agree with you. They're not taking a missing persons report.
No police department would under those circumstances.
Yeah. She would have to articulate something a little bit out of the ordinary.
And so you probably have to show up in person too. How do they know who the hell you are? How can you prove you're his mother?
True.
You can't take a report like that over the phone.
Yeah, it would be
There's no police department that would do that. No
yeah,
one.
that would be difficult.
You know?
Absolutely.
Let me go back to the News Nation report here for a second.
At some point recently, he was staying at sort of a hostel type dorm situation there where he was surfing and made friends. And friends who we spoke to in Hawaii said he complained a lot of back pain. He had a back surgery. He suffered from back pain. We're told at one point he went surfing and was in so much pain that he had to stay in bed for a week. And some of his friends believe that may have contributed to his mental health. He had fallen out of touch with family members and close friends on social media. There were friends who were trying to get in touch with him over the last several months saying, where did you go? We haven't heard from you. Listen to what one of the friends from Hawaii told Chris Cuomo last night.
Not darker and not aggressive and not violent. I think that it's obvious to most people that are aware that many of the systems that we live within don't benefit us as well as they could. And, those are normal intellectual conversations and discussions that we have. And he and I had many of those kinds of intellectual conversations, but never anything remotely towards violence. He was never aggressive. I never even remember him once being upset.
So really everyone that we've talked to, Nicole, from his childhood, from his high school days, from when he was here at Penn, and also when he was in Hawaii, everyone's saying the same thing, that this totally comes out of nowhere, that he showed no signs of violence, and that he was all around really just a great guy, they say, Nicole.
Yeah, so talk more about what Mangione's family is saying, more about this statement that they released last night.
Yeah, so they put out this statement last night, basically saying that they have very little information, that everything they're learning is coming from media reports, and also saying that they are praying for the United Health CEO, but not saying much beyond that. In terms of his family, we know that they're a powerful, very wealthy family in Maryland. The family has historically owned country clubs. They own a radio station. They own nursing homes throughout the state. One of his cousins is a Republican lawmaker in Maryland. So they are a well-connected family in Maryland. They did put out that short statement, but beyond that, they haven't said much else.
Dr. Joni, what does that mean? Coming from that type of background, they really do. I mean, now, of course, they're trying to, I think, cut their losses. That's what it seems like to me. I hate to be that insensitive, I guess, but they have no contact with them, and this tragedy happens.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, they come out of the woodwork. Oh, yes, we reported him missing. Oh, yes, this tragedy, that. But I'm not buying it.
It's interesting. I mean, I don't know what advice they're getting in terms of attorneys jumping in or their, the people who advise them and those kinds of things. I mean, I kind of feel like you do, Phil, that if it was my son, let me tell you, I'd be knocking people down to get there to figure out what happened. That's me. That's you. I mean, I don't know, again, if you're super fluent and you have political connections and all kinds of things, if things work differently in terms of the advice that you get and, handling things in a more measured tone. I don't want to criticize the family because they're also dealing with their grieving, I'm sure. I mean, they have done nothing wrong in terms of they didn't shoot somebody. They have, in some respects, they're also victims here.
Absolutely.
And they'll have to deal with what's going on in their family. So, I'm always hesitant to say without knowing, what conversations they're having, what advice they're getting. I don't understand it as a mom. And, without more information, I can't really analyze it as a psychologist.
You look at his pictures up on the screen and he looks like the all-American boy, great physical condition. He's a good-looking kid. He's got everything going for him. He's smart, valedictorian of his high school. UPenn is an Ivy League school. You graduate from UPenn, every company on this earth wants to hire you. Plus, I think you started out as like a computer programmer. You don't even have to have a master's in that field to get like a six-figure job. Six figures is nothing these days, though, right? 6 figures is what everyone's getting these days. I used to be a big thing, 6 figures. Well, now you're like, hey, I can't get by with 6 figures, It's a crazy thing. Mike, your thoughts?
Yeah, Bill, it seemed like he had everything going for him and he was on a great trajectory. And then as you hear from his roommate, they had discussions, and people have discussions. You're sitting around your roommate or you're at a bar and you're talking about some issue in America, whatever. And fine, you could have these intellectual discussions. And But as the roommate indicated, he never seemed down. It wasn't like he slowly turned into a revolutionary after discussing, these issues about, the fairness of equity in the healthcare industry. It was just basic intellectual stuff that a couple of bright people will talk about from time to time. So it's possible, and the only thing that, and to me, it seems obvious, is that back injury really changed the way he's taking pain medication. But whatever happened, and maybe there was some other damage done, maybe there was some neurological damage done that is unaccounted for. But to have somebody go from what seems to be a world beater, excellent trajectory into the depths of running this operation to shoot someone behind the back and then run away, to me seems really drastic in a short period of time. And so I have a feeling it's got to be a connection between that incident and how he was treated and the dissatisfaction he has with his medical condition and maybe chronic pain. All those intellectual exercises, those intellectual issues that he brought up, turned into real emotional issues, and he felt that he had to do something. It's strange to me. I don't understand it, but then again, I've never had deep chronic pain, and have come kind of dependent on Vicodin and all these other painkillers.
A couple of things kind of came to mind for me I think this was the person in Hawaii who was talking, who was interviewed, who was talking about the fact that he had shared with him that he didn't feel like he could be intimate with a woman, could have sex with a woman with his back condition, that this back situation was very severe for him, at least from his perspective. So it not only caused chronic pain, but it really interfered with his ability to have relationships and to kind of live a normal life. And, Mike, you had mentioned earlier about him being 26, which is not 16, but it's not 50 either. Yeah. So there is, I think, the youthful component to it as well. And I agree, I do think that perhaps, without, speaking of somebody that I have not evaluated, I just do wonder sometimes if there was all these emotions attached to it that he felt about his life and where it was going and his limitations at his age. And that, when we have these emotions we're going to deal with, this pain, physically and psychological pain, if we're not dealing with it effectively, we start telling ourselves stories. I think it becomes a story we tell ourselves about, what the reason for those things are, what that means and whatever. And if I'm telling myself that my life is over, I might start thinking about suicide. If I start telling myself that, this is somebody's fault. And I don't think it was just about the claims or the fact that maybe people weren't getting reimbursed. I think it was also about his perception that he wasn't getting better, that nothing was helping. So he's getting charged for things, or he's getting, denied treatment, but the treatment he's getting isn't working. And so he's getting back surgery, he's getting A, B, or C. It takes him forever to get it. And then when he gets it, it doesn't work. And maybe the combination of those two, I think, had an impact on him.
I saw a more recent interview just before we went on the air of that roommate from Hawaii. And he said something I thought was very powerful with regard to exactly what we're talking about. He said that him and Luigi had long conversations about how the country started going in a destructive direction in the 60s and that it needed to be changed. I thought that was a very powerful statement. I saw it just before we went on the air. I think it was an MSNBC interview, but it was played on Fox. So I thought that was very interesting how that plays into, he's in a position where he's going through this horrible back pain and trying to recover. And now you're talking about, I didn't know that. That's news to me, that he was talking about not being able to be intimate with a woman. And now he starts to talk about the country being off track, going in the wrong direction, a destructive direction from the 60s, and it needed to be changed. So all of these elements are now all starting to come together and make sense to what his actions turned out to be, where he was going with this and how he got influenced by all these things.
But again, one of the things that I find very curious, and I guess I shouldn't because it's happened in the past, is that he's from the same privilege that he's hitting back at. Yeah. And I really do find that curious, and I find it sort of disingenuous even. Dr. Joni, what do you think?
I think people are more complicated than that. You know what I mean? I mean, I think I understand where you're coming from. I do. Because we look and we kind of go, you're biting the hand that fed you, basically, right?
Yes, yeah.
You had all this privilege, and some of the privilege came from the healthcare industry in terms of the, But I think when we're talking about, people who, for whatever reason, start feeling, hopeless, and I think it sounded to me from what his friends were saying in terms of his back injury and what that was going to mean for him in the future. His limitations and the fact that his treatment wasn't working for him. And he talked about being scared of what might be coming down the path. I think it's very easy for those emotions to start taking over. And then our thinking becomes distorted because it's clouded by those emotions. And one of the scariest things to me when I see anybody who's maybe perhaps feeling that way, and again, I'm speculating to some extent because I haven't evaluated this person, but when you see people who are maybe depressed or feeling desperate, the worst thing they can do is isolate themselves, because what do? Not only do you take away your support system, but you take away any objectivity. You take away anybody who can say, wait a minute, this isn't making, wait a minute, I don't think you're seeing this the right way. Who can provide some sounding board, right? Who can kind of help you see that your thinking is not clear. And that just, when you take that away, it just provides this vacuum that then can be filled up with all kinds of things.
Oh, very good point. Jim Serhant from the chat, the very first line in his manifesto, according to the NYPD, reads, "I'll save you a lengthy investigation. I plainly acted alone." Now, I mean, first of all, I don't buy that without investigation. You can't say, "Oh, he's telling the truth. The guy just shot someone in the back, but he's not lying about this." He's clearly telling the truth here. But the point is, he was somewhat living like a loner. What did he do those 10 days in New York City when he came there on the 24th? And I believe the shooting occurred on December 4th, right? What was he doing all that time? Was he really reconning the job? Was he going over it? Was he that much? Look, he's an engineer. And you know that anything about an engineer, they think that there's logic to everything. Everything can be explained in their mind. And that's how engineers think. And he clearly thinks that way, to the point where he never took off a mask. The whole time he was there, he was wearing a mask. When he was eating, he was putting the food underneath the mask. So that part of his personality, I think, has to do with being who he was trained to be, an engineer. Professor Mike.
Yeah, Bill. And part of, as you know, with engineers is their thoroughness, their logic, and they're thorough. They see an answer to everything that can't, everything's got to be able to work out. He may have actually spent very little time enjoying the sights and sounds of New York. Maybe spent a lot of time actually just walking or biking an escape route and looking at timetables and seeing and timing it. How long would it take if I just standing right there at near the Hilton, say, how long would it take for me to get to Central Park or me to get to the Port Authority bus terminal, the one on 42nd Street, which is really close by, or the one way up by the George Washington Bridge? What's the advantage and disadvantage of either one? He may have spent an awful lot of time doing that. He probably did not socialize with anybody whatsoever at all. He probably stayed very close to that place. He didn't wander anywhere. He probably didn't go up to Little Italy in the Bronx, the Belmont section. He probably didn't go down to Chinatown and enjoy himself. No, he probably sat there. He probably barely talked to anybody. Probably stayed very, very, very close by. And I think he just practiced. That to me, I think it's sort of like just a constant repetitive thing until he got it into his mind what he was going to do, and he could do it completely from muscle memory, because how he escaped was, I'm going to say, brilliant. The way he escaped, he timed it perfectly.
Absolutely. From the chat, Rough and Rougher read his manifest. It's horrible what he and his mother went through with United Healthcare. Heard it last night on podcast HTC with Lauren. You know something though? His family's wealthy. They don't need, yeah, of course you don't want to have to pay for your own health care, but they could afford to. It's not like if she didn't get the healthcare company paying for it, that she would go without it. They're multi-millionaires. So I'm not sure if I buy that story. Phil.
Yeah, I don't think that that's the one driving force in this case. And Dr. Joni, you brought up the point about him not being able, let's say, to be intimate with a woman. But yet, when that girl and the hostel flirted with him, he was quick to pull his mask down and present the big smile. So there's probably something to that. He may have been looking for that little bit of a connection with a woman, and he hadn't had it in a long time. So, I mean, that was actually very important in the investigation because we got a clear view of his face. Bill, I'm going to agree with you on, I don't see the financial problem in his family with, providing healthcare for his mom or for himself. So, they seem to be wealthy enough to have handled that. But again, over the years, all the maybe complaints about it, and then this talk that he had with that Hawaiian roommate, or the roommate in Hawaii, about how the country was going in the wrong direction. And they got into a conspiracy about, it started in the 60s and the track of the country needs to be changed. So all of those elements together may have led to the profile of what he carried out.
I actually listened to Hidden True Crime, which is what our guest is talking about. And they were talking about this manifesto, which has yet to be verified, as you were saying. So if we assume for a minute, just for the sake of our discussion, that this is true. Okay, let's assume that this is the manifesto just for a minute. We don't know that it is. From his perspective, and again, that's what matters in this situation, trying to understand that. From his perspective, it's not so much, it sounds like, that it was the financial part of it. I think the financial part of it symbolized something for him. But what this manifesto, if it's accurate and actually was true, it focuses on the fact that his mom is dismissed several times by healthcare as being, it's in her head, or she's given aspirin, which then she develops kind of ulcers and she has to switch to this. It's really about mistreatment. And that's really, I think, what his beef is. And yes, there's all this stuff in there about her claims being denied. But the overarching theme is the healthcare industry screwed me over, screwed my mom over. Not only did they not pay for it, they didn't treat her well. They minimized it. It's all in your head. It's not, she went for this procedure. It wouldn't have worked. They told her she needed $100,000 surgery. Well, if she'd gotten it, it wouldn't have worked because the next test found that it wasn't this. I mean, it was really about this theme of mistreatment or perceived mistreatment.
Dr. Joni, I think we can all agree that the way healthcare is dispersed in this country is a disgrace. And if I have any left-wing or socialist ideas, I think every single person in this country should have health insurance. I really believe that. And whether they get it from their job, and if they can't afford it, then the country, look, we pay for things in this country that, we pay for foreign wars, but we can't pay for healthcare for our own citizens. I think that's disgraceful. I really do. And I know we come across logical cops, but I think that, that is a reason to get mad. That is a reason to get annoyed, but it's not a reason to shoot someone in the back.
Billy, how about the fact that maybe he thinks in his mind, well, if they could do this to my family that has the means, how about the people that don't have the means? And maybe he started to follow stories online of people that don't have a lot of money and are turned down for healthcare. And I heard stories about little children with cancer were turned down treatment. And when you hear those kind of stories, that really tugs at your heartstrings. And then maybe people that didn't have money and a loved one dies. So that could play into it. If they could do this to me and my family that's very wealthy and we own nursing homes, imagine what they could do to someone that's underprivileged or a child that's in need of cancer treatment. So all of those things could be the triggers, and they just built and built and built. And he followed through with the anger and the plot to kill Brian Thompson.
But why did he, and this is directed to you, Dr. Joni, become the spokesperson for the entire world, where I'm gonna kill somebody?
Okay. So again, I'm gonna speculate based on my professional background here, which is what you're asking me to do. But when we talk about, is this person narcissistic? Is this person a psychopath? I would say no, he's not. because we can't look at this one act that he did and say, this is who he is. We can say, this is what he did. And he's 100% responsible for that. But if you look at his life and his achievements up until then, this is somebody who was a leader. Like I said before, was a leader. Somebody who people liked, people thought was kind, is empathic. And what I'm saying about that is that if this is who this person was and or saw himself as being, and he felt all this anger and desperation, and he wanted to lash out and do something, he is going to have to create a story in his mind that justifies what he did. And it's going to have to be bigger than himself. I think when it comes down to it, it is about him and about his experience and his anger and his frustration, his depression. But in his mind, that would not justify him killing somebody. He's got to find a bigger cause to justify that and find that acceptable for himself. I'm not saying this is logical and makes sense or is accurate. I'm saying if you're looking at it from his perspective, that is what I would think he might be experiencing. And Professor Mike, you might want to jump in here too. And
No, I agree with you 100%. People join organizations. They want to fight for a cause that's bigger than themselves, because we live our lives. What are our lives? Our lives are the sum total of everything we do each and every single day. Rarely do we come across some sort of cause or some sort of emergency where we are needed and we feel that we can actually accomplish something. We can be integral to some sort of greater movement. And I think people are attracted to that. If it's a civil rights thing, if it's something to do with religion or race or our nation, say post 9/11, that sort of thing. I think everybody is attracted to feeling like they want to do their bit. And I think you're right. It's as logical as he is. It became very personal when he feels like he's been mistreated. And on top of that, nobody mistreats my mom. Don't you dare mistreat my mom. And so seeing her mistreated, and maybe it's the same way with him, feeling like he's 26 years old and he's having some real serious problems, fundamental. What's his life going to be like? He just blames the entire healthcare industry, and he wants to provide an answer to it, lash out at it. And in some ways that justifies something that objectively is horrible.
it is horrible. And Phil, I would not be surprised if he sought out stories of of people being victimized or people getting denied or people dying as they're waiting for healthcare. I would not be surprised if that was the case, because it would be kind of fuel for him and permission in a way for him to justify what he was about to do, which is indefensible objectively, as we all know.
What we're seeing, though, is we're seeing a great deal of sympathetic people out there that not just sympathize with him, but applaud what he has done. And I find that despicable. I don't know. I think any right-minded people would. There's people even in this chat probably at this very minute saying, oh, I'm glad he killed the guy. I mean, I just can't believe people say that, but we're seeing a lot of that, Phil.
Yeah, the thing that struck me is it seems like it's very, very widespread throughout the country, because you're getting these horrible comments and vitriolic responses to the healthcare industry and, almost promoting what he did. And I just didn't realize how much it goes on throughout the country, in our country with the healthcare system. I said this last night on the show, that I think that perhaps this is going to be the silver lining in the dark cloud, that maybe a spotlight will shine on the things that go on in the healthcare industry, and maybe politics can play in and reform it. And I said, listen, I agree with Dr. Joni, with Bill, with Mike. There's no place for violence in any kind of a situation, no matter what happens. You cannot go out and kill somebody because you have a cause or a belief. And I the minute that goes into the conversation, I check out. I cannot promote violence in any way, shape, or form. And I think that what I said was go out and, you can protest, you could rally, you could write letters, and you can elect politicians that are going to fight for the people. Those are the things. Now, with all of the stuff that's on the internet, and you see that there's a lot of horrifying stories throughout the country. Well, all of those things can be addressed through politicians. And I think that perhaps maybe someone can start maybe even a webpage or something of that nature to, to air out these stories and maybe, try and, make the system better, so we don't have people go off the rails like this and shoot a person in the back. I mean, that man, his family was robbed of of him, and he was killed. And then now we have this young man, his family is victimized as well. And Dr. Joni brought that up earlier. So, we have a lot of victims in this whole tragic turn of events that occurred over the last week. And, I just wish that, maybe something good could come out of it, so to speak. It's horrible to even think like that, but we have to try and turn the page on this and maybe do better next time around with healthcare.
Absolutely. Folks, this is a Police Off the Cuff Real Crime Stories. If you like real crime, true crime from a police perspective, you're in the right place. And if you're not subscribed, hit that red subscribe button on the screen. Give us a thumbs up, hit the like button, share us with your friends and your family. And if you want to contribute to us, we have a Patreon with 4 different levels, and we also have a YouTube channel membership with 5 different levels, and you can support us. We love all of our fans, our subscribers, and our friends that are part of the Police Off the Cuff family. I wanted to put this up on the screen next to show. They're showing on Fox parallels between Mangione and
Kaczynski.
Yes. Now, Unabomber, highly intelligent, of course. Mangione, also highly intelligent. Harvard at age 16, attended University of Pennsylvania for Mangione. Math whiz, he had a PhD. He was also a math whiz, Mangione. Disdain for technology, disdain for corporations. So, I mean, why is it there's this deep hatred for institutions, Dr. Joni?
Well, I think that's rare. I don't know if you have read the Goodreads review he left for Ted Kaczynski's book in February of 2024. Maybe you've read that, but he does pretty much, in some ways, applaud some of the actions, or at least justify some of the actions that Ted Kaczynski took. So I think that these are 2 individuals, who, because they were right, I think in terms of they're very intellectual, very intellectually oriented. I think they did channel their own issues into these political ideologies and justified murder, essentially. And I think that's the commonality between the 2 of them. They were, and I think that's, it's interesting because we all have ways, if we don't find ways to deal with our psychological pain, our physical pain, or whatever, if we don't find ways to deal with those effectively, we're going to act them out in some way. And I think that is a common thread that when you look at, Ted Kaczynski, and you look at, Luigi Mangione. And I think that really is a commonality. But I think it's rare, but I do think that it makes sense in a way that you have 2 people who are very intellectual, and they find these causes, and these causes become a justification for being violent.
Dr. Joni, one of the things that we've seen on the police department, and Phil and I worked a long time in homicide. Mike worked in a very violent precinct his first 5 years on the job. And sometimes you would see someone, their first time, do the most horrific murder. And you see, like, you'd expect, let's run his history. And you're like, he's never been arrested before. And you'd be like shocked. How did he go, or she go, from living a normal everyday life to committing this horrific murder? And when you look at Luigi, same thing. He has like a clean slate, tabula rasa, as they say. I remember that from college, right? He has a clean slate, and he goes and he shoots someone in the back, takes their life. That's unusual, but not uncommon.
It's not uncommon. And I think that's, where it's important to separate out, when you have somebody who has an extensive criminal history, you start thinking, okay, maybe this is who this person is. This is part of their character, right? This is a person who has these beliefs and has had these beliefs since they were 10 years old or 12 years old. And they were in juvenile hall, they did A, B, C, and D. And you kind of go, this is this person. When you see somebody who has led a law-abiding life and seems to be, well-adjusted and done well, and all of a sudden they do something like this, then to me, I start looking at, okay, what was the situation? What is going on that this person went off the rails? Because this is not part of their character. In terms of, this is not part of their pattern of behavior, at least. So how do we explain that? What situational variables contributed to this? I'm not saying that anything happened that caused this, but I'm saying that it makes me wonder if something that was around this time period, maybe it was the tipping point or whatever, had a big part in this, or more of a part in this than looking at this person's character or personality or whatever. Because when you talk about personality, you talk about, again, some of the things that a person has disorders and those kind of, these are not things that pop up in a murder. These are some things you can trace back over a period of time. By definition, you have to have these traits that you can kind of follow for many years. That doesn't appear to be the case in this situation.
Yeah, I mean, someone from the chat, Truth Seeker, Dr. Joni tonight makes the most sense about this case.
100%.
Thank goodness for her understanding and explanation. That's why she's Dr. Joni.
That's right. She really said some eye-opening things tonight, and I think the one that really, really stuck me was about the isolation, because it makes sense. If you're down about something and you're upset about something and you shut off everyone else around you, all you're going to do is focus on that one thing, that whatever it is that's got you upset. And I could use it in like a personal term. If something happens and I'm a little upset about something and I grab one of my kids and talk to them about it, or a family member or my wife, and you get a different perspective, you're getting information, and somebody might point out, it's not as bad as that. Maybe this, or maybe this was the reason that person said that, whatever it is. And I think that was very powerful, Dr. Joni, and I thank you for that.
From the chat, Be Real. We are not bringing up the fact the insurance company CEO and others were being investigated by the DOJ. What connection with that? Be Real. We're not going to get into the whole big part of this investigation because it's huge. It's gigantic, and it's just really beginning. We said about 20% of this investigation is completed. 80% needs still to be found out. T's crossed, I's dotted. There are things the NYPD, the FBI, all of these law enforcement agencies are still going to find out. But it's, no one wants to accept the fact, and I'm not putting you down at all, that investigation takes time. We can't have the answers to all these questions yet because not enough time has gone by yet. People were critical of the NYPD. It took 5 days to arrest this guy? And there were people even critical of the NYPD didn't get him. A person in McDonald's did. Yeah, but the work of the NYPD is what identified him, putting all of those pictures out that they spent thousands of man hours getting off of video, painstakingly pounding the pavement to get it, to produce these stills that resulted in him getting identified in Altoona, Pennsylvania, right? So that is what's called police work. But people were so critical, and even the press is the worst, right? Is this turning into a cold case? 5 days has gone by, and they're already saying, is this already turning into... That is like my biggest pet peeve. Just with Koberger and Dr. Joni, I'm sure you know that case also, the one who stabbed 4 students in Idaho. Mm-hmm. That took 6 weeks to arrest him. The press was losing it. They were losing it, over that.
And they had a lot less to go on than there was in this case, for sure.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
But this, Dr. Joni, you've been fantastic. And, you really do put a picture on what was going on in his mind and what maybe brought him. I still don't fully understand it. But how could you understand? There must have been some level of mental illness here to do what he did. Or just he saw no other way out, or he had to make this statement. And again, I don't have a PhD in psychology, so this is just me sort of waxing on this topic. Your thoughts, Dr. Joni?
I think that there is some indication just based, and I'm basing this solely on what his friends and family have said about him being missing in action and isolating and his behavior changing and those kinds of things. I think there's clearly some evidence that something was going on mentally with him. When you see those kind of behavior changes, that certainly is a signal that something is wrong or something is up. But again, I want to be clear in saying that, none of the things we talked about justify murdering somebody. And unfortunately, the victim here, tends to get left out of the conversation because he can't speak for himself anymore. So he's got his family and, so I think as a forensic psychologist, I always want to try to understand because I want to prevent the next thing from happening and recognize and those kinds of things. And so I think it is important to look at those things. And I do think that, there's a tragedy all the way around here. But I don't want to lose sight of the fact that somebody's dead, who doesn't deserve to be.
And and really, again, he's innocent until proven guilty. But if he gets convicted, his life's over too.
Yeah, exactly.
So
this is a tragedy all the way around. It really is.
Absolutely.
He destroyed his life. Schmitty from the chat, thank you for the $5 super sticker. I still fear copycats since it's grabbed the warped attention of some people.
Yeah.
And people in LM's belief are threatening others like the police, right?
Right.
Yeah, I think it's dangerous that you do have this because once someone does this, it somehow gives someone that's on thin ice mentally the permission slip to do it too, and it's scary. It's absolutely.
It is scary. I think it's a valid concern. I do think it's a valid concern. When you look at the research around, for example, mass shootings and those kinds of things, or school shootings, you do see an increase, especially in the 2 weeks afterwards. So I think it's something to be concerned about. And I'm sure there are many CEOs and other people who are not sleeping as well, probably, since this happened and are concerned about it, and understandably so.
There's been many copycats before as well. So I guess that's definitely a major concern.
Yeah,
absolutely. Lisa Mitchell from the chat, thank you for the $5 super sticker. I have theory he is struggling with his sexuality and is possibly schizophrenic, late onset, possibly drug-induced psychosis. Dr. Joni.
I've gotten that question a couple of times, and I think it's a very valid one. I appreciate you bringing that up. I'm basing my talk on what I've observed publicly, and the fact that his, could there have been something mentally going on with him? I've already mentioned that. That I think there possibly could have been. The psychosis part of it is, I don't know that I've seen any evidence of that. There may be something that I have not seen. But as I mentioned earlier, the fact that his crimes seem to be so premeditated and so planned, it seems to be organized. Nobody has mentioned that who knew him, of him exhibiting, hearing voices, having delusions, those kinds of things. I don't see any evidence. Even the outburst that, from the hearing that went on today, if he was able to go in there, I think I mentioned this, if he was able to go into a hearing, which he was, and listen to his attorney who said, don't say anything, and to cooperate, that again is not evidence to me of psychotic behavior. Now, maybe he'll be evaluated from a mental health perspective. I hope that he is. His defense attorney may urge that. Whether he'll accept that or not, if this is somebody who is needing to be seen as, as a hero and a savior, he may view any mental health assessment as somehow minimizing his message or dissing his message. So he may actually be reluctant to do that, even though I'm sure his attorney will be urging that to happen. So hopefully we'll get more information as this whole process kind of proceeds.
Absolutely. Paul K from the chat, thank you for the $10 super sticker. Love this channel. I believe he anticipated the empathy very similar to the Capitol riots, but what would a boy from Oz know? Laugh out loud. Well, thank you for your comments. Dr. Joni, you're such a great guest. I love having you on the show. And I unfortunately kept you longer than the hour I promised that I would only keep you here for, but I'm going to go around the horn and we're going to give our last comments. Your final thoughts, Phil.
My final thoughts of this. Thank you, Dr. Joni, so much for coming on. I think you gave us a great perspective into the psyche of this individual. Even though you, like you said, you didn't examine him, you're just giving your opinion based on what we see. I think a lot of conspiracy theories were kind of put to the side now. It looks like he acted on his own behalf. I don't think anybody put him up to this. We have to keep the family of Brian Thompson and his family in our thoughts and prayers, because as we stated, there's victims on both sides of this. It's really a shame that Brian Thompson lost his life. And it's really a shame that this kid that had a promising future, he looked like he had, his whole life ahead of him in a very positive manner, and he just threw it all away. It's unfortunate. I'm glad he's off the street, because in the condition he was in, carrying a firearm after he killed somebody, I said it many shows before, he could have hurt someone else. I'm glad he's off the street, and let's hope that this case will unravel. We'll figure out what's going on in his head, what's going on that caused him to do this, and perhaps maybe something good could come out of it in the healthcare and insurance industry.
Professor Mike, your final thoughts.
Bill, from the time we started and we were doing the podcast till like about yesterday, after we found out that he was caught, I went from thinking that he might have been part of some sort of group, really small group that was really supporting what he was doing. But now I'm happy to think that, this guy's created a little world inside his head, and he's acting out, and he's not part of any other group. What I worry about is, like, Dr. Joni and Phil's talked about copycats. I worry that this person may be seen, if there is enough empathy expressed out there in the media, it might be seen, his actions might be seen to be somewhat legitimized. And anybody who's on the border of having some sort of serious mental health issues may use that as further justification for striking out. I hope that isn't the case. And I think we should all keep, the Thompson family in our prayers, because they deserve it.
Absolutely. Dr. Joni, your final thoughts.
Well, I certainly echo what Phil and Mike both said in terms of just the fact that there's just has been a tragedy all the way around. And, I think I'm hoping that as we move forward, we can find a way to have meaningful conversations about whatever the issues are, healthcare or whatever that people have grievances with, and really draw a very bright red line between those legitimate, possibly concerns and grievances and what happened in terms of the behavior of this perpetrator, because he is ultimately, and I can have empathy again as a mom, I can have empathy as a psychologist, but at the end of the day, that is not obviously the way to resolve agreements, and somebody's dead because of it. And so, I just want to keep that in mind in my discussions, that yes, we can talk about this over here, but let's keep that separate from the actions and the way it was handled.
Very well put, Dr. Joni. Folks, I just want to thank everyone. We've been doing a great deal of coverage on this case, and it's voluminous in its nature. There's so much to this case, and we want to thank all the new people we see in the chat, all the new people that have listened to us over the last week or so. And again, I want Dr. Joni, thank you so much for coming on. Folks, I'm Bill Cannon from Police Off the Cuff. Have a great night, everyone, and God bless.
Stay safe, everyone.
One episode just ain't enough.